They didn't just mock her, they orchestrated it like a ritual, meant to remind everyone exactly who belonged and who didn't. It started when a tall blonde in a scarlet hat pointed to the woman standing quietly by the gate. Let her ride Ravager. I mean, if she's already dressed like a stable girl, she might as well act like one. The others burst into laughter. Phones went up, cameras clicked. This wasn't about horses anymore. It was Bloodsport, polished with pearls and Prosecco. The woman in question, she wore a faded linen dress, sun-marked skin, and boots so worn the heels had smoothed to the sole, but her hands, still her posture. Calm, she didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just met their eyes with a gaze that made one of them briefly look away. She probably thinks saddling Ravager will earn her a seat at the club or a husband. The laughter rose crueler now. Someone handed her a weathered leather riding hat, the kind they gave to tourists for photos. Here. Let's see how long she can stay on. $10. She flies off before the third stride. They weren't asking. They were commanding. And she took the reins without a word. Behind her, the gates to the exclusive Palm Beach racecourse stood open, gleaming pristine and utterly indifferent. A world built to keep people like her out. And yet, as she walked toward the mounting block, something shifted. A hush, a pause, not fear, a disturbance in certainty. The Palm Beach racecourse was never just a racecourse. It was a fortress of legacy privilege and unspoken rules handed down like heirlooms from generation to generation. The air smelled of sandalwood and strategy. Even the horses seemed bred not for speed, but for spectacle. Every inch of the place gleamed. White railings, polished daily. Gold nameplates on every stall. The exclusive lounge overlooked the track through a wall of glass tinted just enough to keep sunlight out, and outsiders further. Women in tailored pastel suits floated like swans, whispering in tones that always seemed to trail off, just as someone less refined walked by. Men wore cufflinks engraved with family crests. Their jokes were coded, their laughter curated. And in this world, the woman by the mounting block was a disruption. She's not even wearing gloves. Is that dust on her collar? The insults didn't need to be loud. They were precise. Surgical Palm Beach. Didn't shout it. Exhaled disapproval. She stood there, the reins in hand, and looked entirely out of place. Not because of the clothes, but because of what she lacked in invitation. And yet, something about her presence lingered like a question no one wanted to answer. A younger woman in a mint green coat leaned over to her companion. Do you think she even knows what she's doing? Of course not. That's Ravager. He's thrown off professionals. Even Hugo got hurt last month. They nodded to each other as if their shared scorn made them closer. It often did. The announcer's voice crackled through the speaker system, jolting the air. Next up, an unscheduled rider, on lane 3. A special showcase, folks don't miss it. A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Heads turned, cameras tilted. She mounted, no saddle. No cheers, just silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, pregnant with expectations of failure. The people here weren't cruel without cause. They believed in lines, boundaries, and she, with her silent defiance and unwelcome posture, was coloring far outside them. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that the horse she was riding had once been trained. By her years ago. Quietly, when no one was looking. Back then, she wasn't someone worth watching. She was the daughter of a horse groomer. She swept stalls, polished bridles, and vanished before the real guests arrived. But she had spent more time with Ravager than anyone here ever would. She had seen him panic in storms, freeze at the sound of motorcycles, nuzzle the chest of a dying colt. She knew the cracks behind his fury, and he, somewhere deep in that beast's mind, remembered her. But that wasn't part of the show. That wasn't in the rules. To them, she was nobody. She adjusted her grip. The wind stirred her skirt. The audience leaned forward, and for the first time that day, no one was speaking. The silence didn't last. Once she was fully on the horse, the crowd regained its voice. Only now it was louder, meaner. The camera phones tilted upward, fingers tapping, record mouths twisting into smirks. It's starting. Quick go live. This is going viral. A young man in a navy blazer turned his phone toward his face. Palm Beach elite here, and we've got ourselves a Cinderella moment only without the fairy godmother. Let's see how fast this one turns into a pumpkin. Laughter streaming hearts floated across screens. She doesn't even look nervous, someone whispered. That's not courage, that's ignorance. Cameras zoomed. The commentator's unofficial cruel narrated her every move like it was sport. Look at her hands, no grip, no core. She's going to slide off like soap. She probably thinks Ravager's just a big pony. Every sentence was a scalpel slicing through any chance of dignity. And yet she said nothing, she didn't shift, didn't blink. Even as Ravager pawed at the dirt snorting smoke from his flared nostrils, the announcer's voice crackled again. A reminder to our guests, Ravager is not a beginner's horse. Any injury sustained will be the rider's sole responsibility. A few people clapped, not in support, but in mockery, as if to say, "You were warned." One woman chuckled, eyes never leaving the track. "She'll last less than a minute, mark my words." Half that her friend added. The horse shifted, sensing the tension, unsure if it should bolt or wait. But she leaned in, and for a moment, just a second, whispered something into Ravager's ear. No one heard it, but Ravager paused, and that was unsettling. One man lowered his phone, frowning. Wait, what did she just do? Nothing. Just theatrics. She'll be airborne in 5 seconds. Behind the crowd, a stable hand. Older son Warren stood silently watching. He knew that whisper. Years ago, he'd heard it when she was just a girl. She used to calm the colts that others couldn't touch. The horses followed her, not because they were trained to, but because she understood fear the way few humans ever did. Back on the track, the countdown began. In 5, 4, 3. Phones were raised like weapons ready to capture her fall. 2. Someone giggled. 1. The starter flag dropped, and Ravager took off. But instead of the chaotic bucking chaos everyone anticipated, he launched clean, powerful, and she stayed centered. The first turn came. She leaned just enough. The second he grunted, but she steadied him. By the third, the crowd wasn't laughing. They weren't even breathing. One phone live stream froze because the person holding it had forgotten to tap the screen. Another commentator muttered, "What the hell is going on?" From the VIP booth behind tinted glass, a man had just stood up. His hand rested against the window, watching silent, unblinking, but not indifferent. The track thundered beneath hooves that struck like war drums. Ravager tore down lane 3, like a beast unleashed, powerful, untamed, but not wild, not anymore. She moved with him, not against, not on top, but with no saddle, no bridle, no fear, only presence. People leaned closer to their screens, their eyes wide, breaths caught, halfway. She's still on. What is this? No way. Ravager doesn't let anyone stay past the third turn. But she had, and now they entered the final stretch. It should have been over. This was the part where horses were whipped into frenzy. Riders clenched their jaws, and the elite cheered from leather chairs behind gold railings. But no one cheered now, because in the middle of the track, something impossible happened. Ravager slowed, not stumbled, not tired, not resisted. Slowed. Then as the dust settled and the crowd stared in disbelief, he knelt, right there, front knees folded into the earth, a gesture of submission, of trust, seen only in war horses or animals, saying, "You are mine, and I am yours." A woman in pearls gasped. He bowed. "No, that's not. Horses don't do that. That's a trick. That has to be a trick." But no one had trained him to do that. No one else had ever dared. And she hadn't asked. She had only ridden, only whispered. And he had remembered. Phones dropped to laps. Some were still recording, but hands were trembling. The spell of mockery had broken, and in its place was awe. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverence, and for a brief shimmering moment, it was as if the entire race course had paused its breath, to listen to something older than pride. She slid off Ravager's back like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her boots touched the ground softly. She didn't raise her hands, didn't smile. She simply walked forward past the grandstands, past the judge's box, past the stares that no longer mocked but questioned. Who is she? That was the question in every eye, and somewhere behind those eyes, the first threads of fear began to unspool, because nothing threatens the privilege more than someone they can't place, someone they once dismissed, who now holds their full attention, without saying a single word. From the VIP glass booth, the man who had been watching her stood unmoving, eyes narrowed. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and dialed one number. His voice was low. Buy it. All of it. The man next to him froze. Sir. The race course, the staff, the board. Everyone. He ended the call, then turned and smiled for the first time that day. The dust still clung to the track when she walked past the final white fence. No security stopped her. No official dared intervene. They simply parted like curtains pulled back for the one who had always owned the stage. The audience didn't know whether to stand, clap, or whisper. So they did all three, but behind the smoked glass of the VIP suite, movement finally stirred. The man who had stood motionless now turned toward the door. He moved like someone used to being watched, yet never needing to explain. Two staff members straightened instinctively as he passed, as if their spines remembered him before their eyes did. He exited through the private stairs. No entourage, no announcement. And then he stepped out into the sun. That was the moment everything changed. Gasps rippled like dominoes, because they recognized him, Nathaniel Dorset. The Nathaniel Dorset, CEO of Dorset Equity. A name whispered in boardrooms from New York to Geneva. He didn't appear in public without cause, didn't attend leisure events, didn't need to. He built empires in silence and dismantled others just as quietly. And now, he was walking straight toward the woman who'd just silenced the whole race course. People froze. One woman's wine glass slipped and shattered, but she didn't even blink. He reached her without a smile, without hesitation, and stopped just inches away. No one breathed. And then he reached out, brushed a speck of dust from her shoulder, and looked into her eyes. Are you all right? His voice was soft, intimate, meant only for her, but loud enough for the world to hear. She nodded, not looking away. He turned then, facing the crowd, eyes sweeping over the sea of disbelief, pride, and dread. Good. Because I've just made a few changes. Someone in the crowd stirred. One of the women who had laughed earlier, Cynthia Talbot, president of the Racecourse Foundation, stepped forward. Voice thin. Mr. Dorset, surely there's a misunderstanding. We were simply... He raised a hand. Not to strike, just to stop, but it felt like a verdict. There's no misunderstanding, he said. I watched everything. Cynthia paled, her hands trembled. Behind her, the others didn't speak. They didn't dare. This property now belongs to her, he said plainly. Every name on the board will be reviewed. Every staff member who participated will be replaced. There was no shouting, no threats, just clarity, like a judge pronouncing sentence in a whisper. And then turning back to her, he said, "Let's go home." He offered his hand not to guide her, but to honor her. She took it, and together they walked past the people who had tried to make her fall, past the place they thought she didn't belong. And the silence that followed them wasn't fear. It was respect, heavy-earned, unmistakable. She didn't look back as they walked past the board members, the donors, the patrons in tailored silk and sterling smiles. She didn't turn, but the silence she left in her wake felt like shattered glass. Underfoot, Nathaniel didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The gesture had been made, the verdict delivered. Now, the world simply had to adjust. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, the racecourse's official website changed its homepage. A press release stated that ownership had transferred to a private holding, effective immediately. The press tried to spin it to make sense of it, but the truth was simple. She now owned the Palm Beach Racecourse, and her name, previously unknown to most, now appeared at the bottom of every legal document, every contract, every payroll account. Evelyn Dorset, not just his wife, but a co-founder of Dorset Equity, a silent force behind over 36 acquisitions. The strategist no one saw, but everyone felt. And yet, they had laughed at her boots. Across Palm Beach, calls were made, apologies drafted, reputations re-evaluated. Behind the scenes, it was worse. 3 senior board members were quietly asked to resign. 2 trainers received permanent bans. The woman who had live-streamed the mockery, gone from 3 country clubs in one day. Social ties snapped like brittle glass. Because power, real power, doesn't punish loudly. It whispers and doors close forever. Evelyn didn't comment publicly. No interviews, no statements. But 2 days later, she arrived at the race course. Alone, she wore the same dress, same worn boots. But this time, every door opened before she even reached it. The staff bowed, some apologized, but she said only this: "Treat the horses better than you treated me." Then she walked the grounds, not with a camera crew or a press escort, just presence. And when she passed the main lounge, the one that once refused her entrance, she paused. Inside, the remaining board members were holding a rebuilding meeting. She didn't enter, didn't speak, just looked through the glass. One glance. That was enough. They stood, some instinct they didn't know they had. Made them rise. She turned, walked away. And behind her chairs stayed empty longer than they should have. Because once power is revealed, not spoken, not flaunted but revealed, it leaves a mark, not of fear, but of knowing. The news didn't break. It bled quietly. First came the resignation letters. 3 members of the racecourse board stepped down within the week. No statements, no explanations. Their faces disappeared from brochures. Their names faded from plaques. Then came the calls. Exclusive country clubs began reviewing their guest lists. 2 women who had been caught mocking Evelyn during the event, smiling directly into camera lenses, found themselves uninvited from every gala that month. One of them had been slated to host the Spring Heritage Ball. Her name vanished from the program overnight. She called. She pleaded I didn't know who she was. The answer was simple. That's the problem. Whispers followed wherever they went. Not loud, not cruel, just heavy. That's the one who mocked Dorset's wife. The one with the boots in the live stream. She thought she was being funny. Within days, reputations once built over decades began to crumble. Brands pulled sponsorships. Charities quietly reconsidered their alignment. Real estate deals stalled. Investors grew cautious because Evelyn hadn't just married into power. She had always been part of it. She had just never needed to show it until they made her. One of the trainers. Harris was fired on the spot. His license revoked. He tried to appeal, but no one returned his calls. The security guard who had once blocked Evelyn from entering the main lounge transferred to a low-tier post in another county. No incident report, just relocation. And yet, Evelyn never raised her voice, never signed a public order. Her justice wasn't loud. It was structured, precise. Final one afternoon, the same live streamer, Vanessa Green, tried to enter a fashion brunch downtown. The hostess checked the list, smiled tightly and said, "I'm sorry, Vanessa. We're at capacity." Vanessa looked behind her empty seats. "But there are like 15 tables. Have a good day." The doors closed. That was all. People began to understand. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about power for power's sake. It was about respect. The kind Evelyn had never demanded yet, always deserved. And for those who had treated her like scenery instead of soul, the cost was paid not in headlines, but in doors that would never open again. Evelyn never made a victory speech. She didn't throw a party, didn't post a single word online. There were no headlines with her quotes, no posed photographs, just her silence. But that silence echoed longer than any sound. A week after the race, she returned once more to the grounds, alone again. She walked the stables first, ran her hand along Ravager's neck, now calm, peaceful as if the entire storm had never happened. She whispered something to him again. This time, no one heard it, not even the staff. Then she moved through the facility, passing old corridors where she once swept floors. Every door opened before she reached it. People looked up from desks, bowed slightly, then looked away too ashamed to hold her gaze. She didn't punish them. She didn't need to. She simply was, and in being, she rewrote the rules of power for everyone watching. At the main lounge, she paused again. But this time, she entered. It was empty except for a single photo still hanging on the wall, an old image of the founding board. All men, all polished, all now. Gone. She stood before it, stared. Then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. It was a copy of the original lease dated over a decade ago, when she and Nathaniel first bought a parcel of land. Back when no one believed in her, not even herself. She pinned it next to the photo. No caption, just history correcting itself. Then quietly, she turned and left the lounge behind. Outside, a girl in her early 20s stood waiting by the fence. She wore jeans, mud-stained boots, hair in a messy ponytail. clearly not from the inner circle. Their eyes met. The girl looked nervous. Are you... really? Evelyn Dorset. Evelyn nodded once. But why did you come back? Evelyn smiled. Not grand. Just enough to remind the horses. She said that not everyone in power forgets where they came from. She didn't stay long after that. She didn't need to. Her presence had already done what speeches never could. And when she drove away from the track for the final time, she didn't look in the rearview mirror because she didn't need the past to validate the future she had already built. The story of Evelyn Dorset didn't need embellishment. It spread on its own, passed between whispers at country clubs, rewritten in the quiet awe of boardrooms, retold in dorm rooms and barbershops and wine-soaked book clubs. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true, because in a world obsessed with presentation with branding and curated identity, one woman had reminded everyone of the most basic truth. You don't have to speak loudly to be heard. Evelyn never raised her voice. She never exposed anyone. She simply existed in a way that made the lies around her fall apart. And that was enough. People began to reflect about the woman they had ignored at last year's gala. The old man they'd dismissed in the hallway. The intern who spoke softly in meetings. Because now they knew power isn't always loud. Strength doesn't need to show off. And dignity doesn't beg to be seen. Evelyn's story didn't end with fireworks. It ended with awareness, with people sitting a little straighter when they saw someone less polished, with silence becoming more valuable than applause, with a shift not in rules but in perception. That's how real change begins. Not with noise, but with someone who walks into a room and makes you wonder, what if I've misjudged everyone like her? That question stays long after the story ends. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a truth, a quiet ache, then maybe it wasn't just a story. Maybe it was a mirror. Maybe somewhere deep inside you've been Evelyn. Or you've met someone like her. Someone dismissed, overlooked, laughed at too soon. And maybe you've also realized that silence doesn't mean weakness and dignity. It never shouts. So, if you watch this and found yourself pausing, rethinking a judgment, softening a stare, or simply breathing deeper, then let that be your ripple. Because stories like this don't need a sequel. They just need to be shared. If Evelyn's journey meant something to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Not for us, but for the next. Evelyn, who's still walking into rooms where no one sees her yet.